Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're analyzing a company that is, and this is no exaggeration, pretty much the central nervous system of the entire North American industrial complex.
Rockwell Automation.
Rockwell Automation. And our mission today is critical. We really need to figure out if this industrial giant's fortress, which they've been building for a century, can actually hold up against modern technological warfare.
It's a fascinating question. I mean, at its core, Rockwell, or ROK, sells these rugged industrial computers, the famous Allen Bradley parts.
Right.
But their business, that $8.26 billion in annual sales, isn't really about selling metal boxes.
Right.
It's about the translation. If they take chaotic physical forces, things like heat, motion, pressure, and turn them into orderly digital logic.
And they do that using their own proprietary hardware and their exclusive software, Studio 5000.
Exactly. It's a closed, symbiotic ecosystem, tightly coupled.
And that closed loop, that's what gives them their scale and, more importantly, their pricing power. We're diving in right now because ROK is going through this profound metamorphosis. They're trying to pivot from being just a transactional hardware seller to this platform-centric connected enterprise.
And it's not an optional shift. They have to do this.
Why is that?
It's being mandated by these huge structural forces. First, you've got the whole reshoring trend. Supply chain fragility is pushing manufacturing back to the U.S., which means huge greenfield opportunities.
Do factories new equipment?
Billions in capital expenditure. And second, the workforce is aging. The skilled technical labor force is shrinking, so factories have to substitute capital for labor. It's an accelerating trend.
So ROK is positioning itself as the solution to both of those megatrends.
That's the pitch. That's their future value proposition.
Okay, so if they're the linchpin, how strong are the walls of that fortress? Let's talk about the economic moat, because that proprietary system you described, that's created some unbelievable barriers to entry.
Oh, the moat is wide and deep. And it's unique because it's not really about the hardware being better. The core defense is just incredibly high switching costs.
And not just financial costs, right?
No, not at all. They're cognitive, they're operational. It's about the people.
So when you say customer captivity, what does that actually look like on the factory floor?
Okay, so picture a big auto plant. It's been running for, say, 25 years.
Right.
They have sunk an immense amount of intellectual capital into thousands of lines of code over that time. We're talking about ladder logic.
Can you explain that? What is ladder logic?
It's this specialized visual programming language. It was designed to look like the old relay logic diagrams that electricians used. So it's the visual language of the factory floor.
So it's intuitive for the people who work there.
Deeply intuitive. Now, to switch to a competitor like Siemens, you'd have to rewrite all of that logic. That's your intellectual property. And you'd have to retrain an entire maintenance crew that has spent decades learning the little shortcuts and debugging tricks of the Rockwell environment.
So the cost of the actual hardware, the physical controller, is tiny compared to that risk.
Trivial. Absolutely trivial.
And that risk premium, that's what lets them charge what the industry calls the Rockwell tax.
Precisely. It's the premium you pay for the assurance of continuity. We'd estimate that tax lets them charge, maybe 20 to 40% more for parts that are, frankly, technically equivalent to what their rivals sell.
Because a plant manager just can't take the risk.
Never. A week of unplanned downtime could cost millions, tens of millions. You're not going to risk that to save a few $1,000s on a controller. That risk aversion is the real moat.
And we saw this in action, didn't we, with the Ford Blue Oval City project, a huge greenfield opportunity, and Ford still chose Rockwell.
That decision tells you everything you need to know about the power of inertia. I mean, Siemens has world-class hardware. It's technically on par.
So why didn't they win?
Because the decision wasn't just technical. It was about execution risk. Ford's existing plants, their supplier network, their technicians, they all know Rockwell. They know the shortcuts, the safety protocols. When you're launching a mission-critical EV platform, you minimize variables. And in that calculus, familiarity beats price every time.
So it's not just institutional inertia. It's almost a cognitive thing, a Pavlovian response for engineers.
That's the behavioral moat. For almost 50 years, the Allen Bradley PLC has been the default teaching tool in technical schools across North America.
So when a new generation learns automation, they're learning Rockwell.
Their mental model, their share of mind, is the Rockwell interface. They associate its look and feel with competence, with safety, and that creates this powerful, self-perpetuating cycle of lock-in.
The fortress is clearly formidable,
Yeah.
but You're suggesting that the trajectory of that moat is, well, it's shifting from stable to narrowing. What's the existential threat here?
Yeah. The siege is coming from the democratization of technology. RK dominates U.S. discrete manufacturing. We estimate around 70% market share, but the whole proprietary model is under attack from open standards, specifically a standard called IEC 61499.
And this is the standard being pushed by that consortium, universalautomation.org, which is backed by their big rival, Schneider Electric.
Yes. And this is the existential risk. The goal is to decouple the software from the proprietary hardware.
So like Android versus Apple.
That's a perfect analogy. The iPhone's OS only runs on an iPhone, but Android runs on hardware from dozens of manufacturers. If Automation can run on any controller, Rockwell's main advantage, that vendor lock in it, just evaporates. Their controller risks becoming a commoditized box.
And this isn't just theory. You're seeing big customers actively trying to break this pricing power.
Oh, yeah. Huge end users like ExxonMobil and Shell are piloting what's called open process automation, or OPA. They're actively working to break Rockwell's grip.
Which forces Rockwell into what you call the Red Queen race.
Right. They have to spend billions just to stay in the same place as the value migrates. They've spent over $4 billion on acquisitions, buying companies like Plex for cloud-based manufacturing systems and Fiix for maintenance software.
And those aren't for growth. They're defensive plays.
Completely defensive. It's to make sure that as value moves from that box on the factory floor and up into the cloud, Rockwell still controls that value layer. They have to.
So what's the feeling on the ground? When you look at customer feedback, what's the sentiment? Are they resentful?
It's a paradox. The sentiment confirms how sticky the product is, but it also highlights the tension.
How so?
Engineers love it because it's stupid simple to use compared to rivals. And in a factory, simplicity is money. It means you diagnose problems faster, you get the line running again, every minute counts.
But that simplicity comes at a price.
A very steep price.
Mm-hmm.
There's deep resentment over the Rockwell tax, and you hear constant complaints about support quality if you don't have a top-tier service contract.
So the takeaway is, they rely on Rockwell, but they don't love Rockwell.
That's it exactly. They rely on it because it works and their people know it, but they don't love the relationship or the cost.
Okay, that reliance brings us to the numbers, the financial health. Because even a strong fortress can crumble if the stewardship is poor.
And we've seen some painful volatility recently. Rockwell got hit hard by the bullwhip effect over the last year.
Explain that.
So post-pandemic, everyone panicked about supply chains and started hoarding inventory.
Right. Double ordering, triple ordering.
Exactly. Then, once things normalized, all that hoarding turned into a massive destocking cycle.
Yeah.
So ROK's reported sales fell 9%, but the core software and control segment, its organic sales plummeted a staggering 24%.
Wow.
That's the brutal cyclicality that's hidden under the moat.
And this pressure, it's showing up in their quality metrics, right? Their return on invested capital, their ROIC, is taking a hit.
It has. Historically, it was always above 20%. Now it's hovering around 13%.
Why the big drop?
Well, part of it is structural. That ROIC number has been diluted by all the goodwill from those big software acquisitions, like the $1.7 billion for Plex.
So is that temporary or is that the new normal?
That's the big question. But you have to acknowledge the cash engine is still humming. They still have almost 100% free cash flow conversion. So the core business is still a cash machine.
Okay, but let's talk about stewardship, because this is where we often find weaknesses. What's the concern with Rockwell's leadership?
It comes down to alignment. The insider ownership, it's dangerously low. Less than 1% of outstanding shares are held by the board and executives.
So they're not eating their own cooking, so to speak.
Not really, no. And it creates this risk that management is acting as agents, focused on hitting targets to maximize their paychecks rather than as principals who are obsessed with long-term shareholder value.
And you see this reflected in their capital allocation strategy.
I think so, yeah. It feels very rigid, almost algorithmic instead of opportunistic. Their hierarchy just dictates consistent share buybacks, and they're often doing it at really high valuations, like 25, 30 times earnings.
Which is arguably destroying value.
You could make a strong case for that, yes. A true owner would hoard cash during the booms and then buy back shares or assets aggressively during the troughs.
Okay, so this brings us to the final paradox. We have a narrowing moat, execution risk on this huge software pivot, questionable capital allocation. And yet the market treats Rockwell like a premium tech company. It's trading at around 25 times forward earnings.
The market is pricing in perfection. It's looking straight through this destocking cycle, and it's assuming a sharp V-shaped recovery in 2026 and a completely flawless transition to a software model.
So where's the margin of safety for an investor?
With a company like this, it's not in the assets. The margin of safety has to be in the durability of its earnings power relative to the price you pay.
And 25 times earnings? That doesn't leave much room for error.
None. It's priced for decades of smooth sailing. A more prudent investor, I think, would want to see a valuation closer to 18 or 20 times normalized earning.
And that discount is for what, specifically?
It's to account for the very real execution risk in integrating those $4 billion of acquisitions, and for the possibility that the open standards movement shaves a few points off their pricing power over the next decade.
But we have to acknowledge the huge catalyst that justifies some of that premium, the whole reindustrialization of North America.
Absolutely. This is a multi-decade tailwind.
Yes.
All the new battery gigafactories, the Chips Act, semiconductor fabs, that is all greenfield demand that Rockwell is perfectly positioned to capture.
And then convert into long-term services revenue.
Which is their high-margin annuity stream. It's a massive opportunity.
They also have a defensive catalyst in their partnership with Microsoft, the FactoryTalk Design Studio Copilot.
That is a critical defense. If generative AI can automate writing ladder logic, it lowers the skill barrier for new engineers. It reinforces their cognitive moat by making Rockwell the easiest platform for the next generation to learn.
Which brings us to the final contrarian verdict, the Red Team Challenge. You call it the Nokia moment.
Right. The core risk is this. Investors are paying a premium price for the hardware king at the exact moment the industrial world is trying to become a software republic.
So the risk isn't that Rockwell dies.
No, not at all. The risk is that they end up dominating a commoditized hardware box while all the real economic value migrates to open, hardware-agnostic software runtimes, the kind that Schneider is pushing. You're betting the next 20 years will look like the last 40, and at this price, that's a risky bet.
So what's the final thought you want to leave the listener with?
If Rockwell succeeds in this crucial partnership with Microsoft, and the value of industrial automation really does move almost entirely to the cloud, to Azure, well, that raises a really provocative question for you to think about. Does Rockwell manage to maintain control of that lucrative software layer and keep its premium? Or does it risk becoming, in the end, just a very high-margin data pipe that feeds Microsoft's industrial AI platform? The answer to that will determine who captures the ultimate value here.